Hello and welcome to the Jackcast, your Swansea City podcast. A little bit different this week. I'm hosting, I'm Steve Carroll. Unfortunately, Matt can't join us. He's otherwise unavailable. But don't worry, you're not going to have to listen to me talking on my own for the next however long. I wouldn't subject you all to that. But I am very lucky and glad to say that Tom Coleman, the Swansea City reporter from Wales Online, is making his second appearance on the podcast tonight. Thank you very much for joining us, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Stephen. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I think we're definitely going to start this evening with a fans forum that was very interesting last night, and then we'll look back at the last three games, and then we'll go into the big one on Saturday, which is of course Wales against Italy. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything. But right, let's get to it. So last night there was a fans forum at the stadium. At the top table was Richard Morris from The Commercial, Luke Williams, our manager, the sporting director, Paul Watson, and the chairman, Andy Coleman. It was an interesting night, to say the least. Tom, it was your second appearance at a fans forum. I mean, the last one was quite subdued, really, wasn't it? But last night was pretty lively.
Yeah, well, I think if you want an indication of what the first one was like, there were two separate questions on matchday programs and why there aren't any physical matchday programs anymore. So that gives you some idea of the tone of the first one. No, this one was a lot livelier. I think it was, the first chance really for supporters to kind of vent the frustrations that have been building for the last few months. Obviously, since the first one, Michael Duff has gone. We've had, what was quite clearly a pretty farcical managerial search, which we spoke about last time I was on the pod. And the scrutiny over the last summer windows has increased as every week has gone on, really. And Paul Watson took a lot of flack. In fact, you yourself probably set the tone quite early with your second question.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think from my point of view, the transfer business needed a lot of scrutiny. I think, as I said, Carl Rushworth has been an excellent signing, but from my point of view, I think the goalkeeping coach Martin Margetson has had a lot to do with that, because you would have known him from the England setup, and a lot of the other signings have been not great. I mean, Tyman's been better recently. Key has done well, but he was a target previously. And I mean, you've just got to look at the wastage, haven't you? With Kukarevic, Jawa on, Yates has not done great. And I mean, there's got to be scrutiny over it. And I think, like you say, really, by going in hard quite early, I think it did sort of give other fans a little bit of confidence then as well, to think, well, there's been a good reaction to this question, and a lot of other people probably have similar feelings about the issues that we've had this season. And it went from there, really, then, didn't it? And like you say, Watson did take a lot of stick, but at the end of the day, when you're in these jobs, you're there to be shot at, aren't you, if you're not doing a good job in the opinion of the fans?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't want to be an apologist for the regime too much here, but I think there is an important point, I think, that's kind of got a bit lost in all the fierce criticism that I fully understand. This season has been the worst season Swansea have had since relegation from the Premier League. So I fully understand the frustration and the anger and the disappointment and all that. But I mean, I was thinking afterwards, I'm not sure how many other football clubs would have allowed an environment where their owners or the people that are running the club to be on the end of such forthright criticism. So I do think in that respect, they do deserve a little bit of credit for that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how these audience with the Jack Army things are going to work with Andy Coleman. In fact, he announced that just hours earlier. I couldn't help but wonder if at times he was kind of reconsidering, because it really was uncomfortable for Andy Coleman and Paul Watson, as we said. And those frustrations and those resentments that have been building up over the last few months really, really came to a head. I mean, there was some. I mentioned your question earlier. I think yours was probably on the more civil side of things. I think a couple of the questions were in danger of getting a little bit personal, if I'm honest. But again, I fully understand the anger and fully understand the criticism, and it's the one thing you kind of hope is that the likes of Watson and Coleman now will be left in no uncertain terms as to where the fan base is at. And I think the reality is I think there's going to be some corners of the fan base that, no matter what happens, are never going to accept them. But I think there is some winning over that is still possible. But if that's going to happen, they're going to have to take on board the points that were raised on Monday night and act upon them. I mean, there were a few questions. I mean, particularly from Andy Coleman, where I thought he skirted around the issue a little bit too much. And I think there needs to be forthright communication is the only way that this is really going to work. So it was quite refreshing to see them put themselves up, I guess, to effectively be pelted with proverbial rotten tomatoes. But I mean, it was an uncomfortable night for them. But I think a very, very important fans forum that I hope will be constructive in the long term, really.
Yeah, like I say, it was no doubt an uncomfortable night for them. On a human level, I do sympathise. It wouldn't have been easy to have sat there and taken, some of the criticism that was levelled at them. But at the same time, if you're in that job, you have to accept it as well. You're on a lot of money to make these decisions, and if you're not doing a good job, then you're going to get questioned along those lines, aren't you? Like you say, it is important not to make it personal. There's certainly a line that you try not to cross. I mean, I like to think that I didn't do it. I just criticised the decisions rather than saying that anyone wasn't capable. I just sort of said that, we can't trust Watson. And I think that is, an opinion that's probably not one where I'm on my own with. But, I mean, like you said, I think the frustration for me was, I thought there were a lot of good questions last night, but I didn't think many of the answers were great. I think, like you say, there was a lot of skirting around the issue, wasn't there? And one gentleman asked a question, didn't he, and basically said that Coleman, for someone that says a lot, you don't really say much, and that was quite damning as well. I thought it was tough to argue with that. To be fair to Andy Coleman, like you say, he fronted up. I do think he cares, and his heart's in the right place. I know, as he said many times, he's moved over here and stuff like that, and I do think he's more bothered than a lot of what his predecessors are. But at the same time, if you're skirting around issues, it just feels like there isn't really a proper plan. I always remember when Trevor Birch came to the club, he was at a few of the fans forums, and there were some tough questions asked there, mainly financial ones, really. And he didn't really skirt around the issue. He said, look, this is where we're at financially. I think one was about Van der Horn before, about whether he would get a new contract. And he said, well, if we don't get promoted, no. Because he said he's on like the wage that we can't afford, and if we offer him a lower one, that's to the point where we would be willing to go, then he's not going to sign it. So, yeah, but you don't mind that because you're just getting honesty then from your chairman. But I think there's just a lot of scepticism in general, really, I think, isn't there? With not so much just Coleman, but I think just this whole regime, because it's not been great from day one. Quite a few people have been involved behind the scenes and have left, and now obviously we've got new people again, and I think it just shows the lack of faith, really, doesn't it? But I mean, if you look at what was said about the system being broken and not much scouts in place, like that's got to be on the regime, isn't it? That was levelled at Coleman. And how can you be in that situation after 8 years? Yes, managers may leave and staff may leave, but to have things not in place, nothing in place, seems crazy to me. And it almost seemed as if as well Watson didn't have much in place himself, and we couldn't even rely on him, which I found to be very odd.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think it's interesting you bring up the contracts thing, because I think there were a couple of questions that asked about contracts and players out of contracts, and we still didn't really get any answers on it. I mean, obviously, Liam Cullen, Paul Watson, once again said that he's got an option, which I think was common knowledge anyway. But what worries me is that I seem to constantly hear things like, "Oh, we need to start conversations soon," blah 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 blah. And you got players like Jamie Patterson, who I don't know if you saw before the Bristol City game.
Effectively, he was talking about that, wasn't he? That he wants to stay, but he's had no discussions.
effectively wants to stay. Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding that the likes of Joe Allen, for example, there's not been any discussions yet, nothing concrete anyway. And you just kind of wonder, well, if you are going to keep some of these players, surely the time now to start sitting down with them is right now, because these things can take time to negotiate, and players want to know where they're going to be playing next season. I mean, I kind of accept the argument to an extent that some players might want to wait and see where Swansea are, but I mean, I don't. That's assuming really that they are in a genuine relegation battle, which I'm still not massively convinced on. But I mean, coming back to the point on recruitment and the systems that were in place. I mean, I'm a little surprised that people are surprised by that point, to be honest, because I don't think it's really been a massive secret that Swansea's recruitment since relegation from the Premier League, and probably even before that, has been a bit of a mess. I mean, it's there's been a total lack of cohesion for several years in terms of their transfer strategy. So I do kind of sympathise with Andy Coleman on that to an extent. But I think where that argument kind of falls down is when you start spending 8 million or whatever it was in the summer window and end up with several players who just simply haven't been good enough this season for various reasons, and reasons that I don't think you can necessarily totally level at the likes of Paul Watson. But for one reason or another, it hasn't worked out with some of them. But so I kind of sympathise with that point to an extent. And Andy Coleman, as he said himself, I think last night, he wasn't here when all that was happening, and he's kind of walked in to essentially pick up the pieces. So I think there probably is a grain of truth in what he's saying there. Whether it's the full picture, that's the real question. But I think the more important question really is now, what is this recruitment system that the likes of Paul Watson are looking to oversee? What is that really going to look like, and is it going to be successful? Ronaldo got mentioned several times on Monday night, sort of held up as this kind of messianic figure for Swansea's season.
I was starting to think we'd sign Ronaldo the way they were talking about him.
Don't get me wrong, I like him, and I think he looks a great player. But I think, talk about piling on the expectation. But I mean, are we really at a stage where we can? I mean, my point is, are we at a stage where we can point to Ronaldo and say this is an example of the success of the system that Paul Watson wants to implement? And I'm not sure we're at that stage yet. I mean, me personally, my opinion on Paul Watson is, I think for me the jury is still out. I understand the criticism of, and there's no question he's made mistakes. But if you are going to take him for his words, this system that he wants to implement, and the whole sort of increasing the sophistication around things like data and scouting and that, all this takes time. So if you're going to take him at his words, I think it's only fair that you afford him at least another summer window. But the flip side of that is, he's got to get it right. He's got to get it right, because if he doesn't get the summer, recruitment drive bang on, and let's be honest, I think last time I was on here, we were talking about the fact that there was probably going to be an overhaul in the summer with the amount of players that are out of contract, the loanees that could go back, etc. So it's not an easy task. I mean, they're effectively back to where they were last summer in terms of what they need. So it's not going to be easy. And if Paul Watson doesn't get that right, there's not going to be anywhere else to hide. And that's when you really would start to fear for him.
Well, I think that's my concern really, is that if he does get another window, I don't have faith that it will go well. And I do think we are one bad window away from real trouble. I mean, as you've said there, I agree with your stance on, I don't think relegation is a major issue at this stage. Obviously, it could become one. We're not safe by any means. But I do think we're going to be okay. That's my gut instinct at the moment. But we are one bad window away from really struggling. I mean, like you said, there's 6 players on loan here. I mean, apart from Carl Rushworth, I wouldn't be too sorry if none of the others are here next year. I mean, Joe Allen was discussed then, wasn't he? I think the Joe issue really is, can he stay fit for the rest of the season? If he can, I think he does get a new deal, and he should get a new deal. But obviously, it's been so stop-start since he came back. I sort of have to understand why he hasn't had a new deal at this stage. And I get the feeling similar with Patterson. It's more that last year he wasn't great. And then obviously there was the issue with the contract before. He got a new contract and then didn't perform. So maybe they're waiting and thinking, well, if we give him a new contract too early, he won't. He could down tools potentially. I don't know, but they would be my issues for them. But as you say, I mean, Cullen's out of contract as well. So is Norton. So there is going to be another big overhaul, isn't there? And it's one that Swansea can't really afford to get wrong. I mean, wanted to discuss a couple of other things as well. I mean, I think another reason why Watson's quite widely disliked is this whole relationship with Nathan Jones, isn't it? And I mean,
oh gosh,
he was challenged on that, wasn't he? And I mean, for me, I think one of the more amusing lines of the night was when a kid got up and said, "Oh, can we beat Cardiff this weekend? Because I'm in school with a lot of Cardiff fans." I think Kev Johns responded with, "Who'd want to go to a school like that?" And Nigel, who's sitting next to me, shouted Nathan Jones. And it's just like, that, for comedic reasons, I think that may be the highlight of the night. But, I mean, I think the issue I've got with it isn't so much that there's a relationship there. There's going to be. It's not a problem. But it's almost as if they can't grasp that it is a problem to us. And I think that's what the frustration is. You just think that in maybe the previous regime, when Hugh Jenkins and those people were here, they would know that just can't happen. But it just shows that I think this lot are out of touch and they can't grasp that this football club shouldn't be anywhere near somebody like that. And I think that's the frustration, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think Paul Watson's PR skills certainly leave a lot to be desired at times. I mean, it's not just his own judgment though on that big picture with Nathan Jones. I mean,
I agree with you. I think Coleman.
Why is no one from the? Why is no one? Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I think the likes of Coleman should be stepping in and saying, "Come on, what's this? You can't be doing this."
Well, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like, why is no one from Swansea City saying, "Mate, this isn't a good look. I know you're friends, but at least keep it on the down low. At least try and bloody hide it." I mean,
yeah, just have phone conversations. Don't be seen in public.
But I mean, it was the fact they were getting battered at Bournemouth as well. I mean, it just piles it on, doesn't it? And optics are a very, very, very powerful thing in football now. Probably, with all the various media channels and ways that people can distribute and consume content. I mean, there's not really anywhere to hide now, so you have to really get your PR bang on, and that was unquestionably a bad decision. I know there's a bit of skepticism around. I mean, when Paul Watson was asked about this, he basically says it wasn't anything to do with me. They just put us together because they knew we worked with each other, and I've got no reason to doubt that. But I mean, certainly, let's just say there was a great deal of cynicism in the room when he said that.
I think the other issue is, I'm sure you were at the previous South Wales derby, but I mean, the discussion was there that they were sat next to each other at that game. I don't know if you're aware of that at all.
I'm not aware of that for sure. No, I mean, it's something I've heard, but
I think that's the other issue. If people have heard that, then and they've seen that happen again, it looks like more than a coincidence, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. And Nathan Jones was. Let's not forget, Nathan Jones was also quite heavily linked with getting the job at one point. Although I don't think there was ever any realistic possibility of him getting it. But the fact that you have his name even being discussed in these quarters kind of leaves all those feelings a bit raw, doesn't it? I mean, I just don't. Yeah, I mean, coming back to Paul Watson's poor PR. I mean, I spoke about his kind of revamping of the recruitment thing earlier, and the thing I just don't really understand is the apparent lack of effort in trying to bring fans along on the journey. So, I mean, last night we heard Martin Hodge was going to be, is head of recruitment. I mean, it's my understanding he's been in the role for quite a number of weeks now.
I first heard that at the end of November in a structured dialogue meeting. So it's baffling how that wasn't announced, and you're just thinking, like, I don't see what the negative is from announcing that either. It's just baffling, isn't it?
But I mean, but my point is, you know, if you're going to plead for patience and say, look, this is the kind of system we want to build, you know, this is the structure, you know, we're going to have this guy doing this job and this guy doing that job. Why the smoke and mirrors around who's going to be head of recruitment? I just don't understand it. It doesn't, from a PR point of view, it just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I'm still a bit mystified by that one. But I mean, I'd like to think it's just down to naivety. But I mean, certainly speaking to some people within the club, they were almost a bit surprised that, you know, people were surprised that it wasn't officially announced, if that makes sense. But you know, the head of recruitment, head of academy recruitment, those are two very important jobs within this alleged new structure that I keep banging on about. But you know, and with that in mind, you know, you kind of think that they'd be wanting to be quite transparent about it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a real brainer, that one.
Yeah, it is. I mean, from your point of view, obviously you cover the club on a regular basis. You'll have a lot of dealings with the manager, for example, but I can imagine it's not so easy to speak to other people. So I can imagine from your point of view that nights like this, especially when people are asking tough questions, is great, because then it gives you that little bit of understanding as well. And obviously you can write about it. But I mean, is it difficult to speak to the likes of Paul Watson and Andy Coleman normally? Is it actually easier for supporters to be able to ask questions like that because they make themselves a bit more available in the fans forum than they may do for the press?
It's difficult to get them down into a public setting, and you know, I don't necessarily want to. I don't really want to speculate on the reasons for that, because you know, I'm sure there's certain reasons why they don't particularly want to sit down with the press at certain times or whatever. But certainly the fans forum is definitely more of a chance to ask questions that, for various reasons, the media can't really ask. I mean, you know, I and you know, plenty of my colleagues who cover the Swans constantly get grief for not asking, quote unquote, the tough questions. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, you know, we can't really go up to a press conference with Luke Williams and say, why has Paul Watson not been sacked? Like, that's just not how it works. And yeah, I think I wouldn't say that the supporters have more access. I mean, because let's be honest, this is two fans forums in the space of, when was the first one?
It was mid-October.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, it's not been, the level of communication has not been constant, and certainly during the managerial search, I think a lot of fans felt that they were left in the dark a little bit. But yeah, no, I mean, I can't speak for everyone on the press pack, but certainly I myself are constantly looking to sit down with Paul and Andy, and you know, really going through some of the issues. And you know, if they're willing to do it, then we're more than happy to listen. But I mean, you know, it's not like, I think there's a perception that we're just not trying to ask these questions and not trying to get answers on certain things. But I mean, it's not really like that. There's certain protocols within the media that you've got to follow and things like that. And also, you know, it's a question of what can be said in a public domain and what can't be. So, you know, it is a tough one.
Okay, people, there we go. We've had it from the horse's mouth. It's not always as easy to get answers to questions as we'd like. So, yeah, I thought there was a good chance there for Tom to have his say. So I think just before we wrap up with that fans forum, I mean, how do you think the top table will feel about it, really? I mean, they've really been put under a lot of pressure there with some tough questions, as we've said. I mean, from my point of view, I just hope that they it's almost a little bit of a rude awakening, really. And they think, "Cool, the fans are really not happy with us, and it's for this reason, and we need to justify what we're doing and where we can make improvements." Because I think the answers, I didn't think they were brilliant, but arguably no answers were going to be enough to some of those questions. It's actions that's needed. So I think that's what I'm hoping for. I mean, do you think that's realistic, that they'll take certain things on board and address them?
Well, I hope so, because otherwise, what's the point of it all? I mean, like, there's not really any point in having a fans forum otherwise, is there really? I mean, no. You're just going to be, if you're not going to act on it, you're basically just providing people the chance to give you grief. And, if you're not going to act on that, then what's the point? I mean, so I'd like to think so, yeah. But look,
my concern is they might not have another one now.
Well, I don't know.
Probably took them by surprise after the last one. They probably thought, we had a nice little reasonable ride there, but it was really not like that last night.
But really, I mean, can they? Would they really have been surprised? I mean, if they've been surprised, I mean, that's a bit worrying, because it shows they're not really paying attention. I mean, there's been discontent at various games. I mean, certainly towards Paul Watson. I mean, there's been banners and songs and whatever. I mean, it's not like the criticism hasn't been there. So I would be surprised if they were really that taken aback. I mean, maybe the ferocity of it might have surprised them a little bit, but I think the general underlying points that supporters are making, I don't think is necessarily. I mean, you can't be taken aback by that if you're paying attention. It is the view I'd say. But I as I said before, I'm going to be very interested to see how these one-on-one meetings that Andy Coleman's going to have with fans, how they happen, what sort of things are going to be discussed. Is it going to be one of those where everything's going to be up for discussion? Is he going to be able to have the wriggle room to sort of bat away questions, in which he did at times on Monday? And how much demand will there be for it? Judging by Monday, I imagine quite a bit.
Yeah, I think he'll front up. I'll give him his due on that one. I'm not sure he's going to say what people are looking for. He'll probably take quite a few minutes to give a politician's answer, is my instinct. But look, I do think his heart's in the right place. I do genuinely think that. But yeah, I mean, I am tempted to put my name forward for it. Be interested to see as well whether it will get anything will get mentioned in terms of what's said. I mean, is it a private meeting? Can you say, are you allowed to reveal what's going on? Will the club reveal it? It does feel very up in the air, that one. But we'll watch this space with interest. Certainly an interesting initiative, isn't it? I mean, I can't think of many other clubs that would do that. I mean, there's not many clubs, for example, that do a fans forum, is there? And I think last night is probably one of the reasons why. So. But yeah, I mean, from my point of view, go on, sorry.
But this is the weird paradox about it all, because, you've got on the one hand, these guys are supposedly terrible owners, and yet they're doing something that, most owners of football clubs just wouldn't dream of doing. I mean, it's certainly not in this way. So it is a bit of a weird kind of, it's a weird contradiction in a way.
It sort of is, but I think the sort of the difference is what usually happens is you will get the chairman and the manager. Obviously, the sporting director is sort of a new addition for us, really. But when the chairman's been someone like Trevor Birch or Julian Winter, I don't think there's been that sort of anger towards them, if that makes sense. I think it's been very much viewed of they're more in line with what Swansea fans would want, and Trevor Birch and Julian Winter in particular are football men. They've worked in football. They understand how it works. And I'm not sure everyone feels that way about Andy Coleman. And obviously his nationality probably comes against him as well. He's more associated with the ownership group. I mean, a few years back, there was a fans forum with Jason Levy and Steve Kaplan, and that got quite heated, to say the least as well. So sometimes it does depend on who's there. But I mean, that was certainly the most heated for a while. And I think the reasons for it are that there's two clear people that are viewed as to blame, and I think in previous ones, it may have been a case of Levian and Kaplan are the ones in the fans' thoughts. But if they're not there, then obviously there's no point expressing too much anger, because, the people you're angry at are not going to hear it. So, but it is, like you say, it is an interesting one. They've done them for about 20 years. I mean, I remember them even when Swansea was still at the old Vetchfield. That's when they started, and they have been very good down the years. We're very lucky to have them. And what I would say as well to anybody listening that didn't go and has never been, certainly is worth going. I mean, I've seen accusations before, people saying that questions that are asked are not good enough. And, well, you'd have to say that last night that certainly wasn't the case, and things are not vetoed. I mean, because, there were a lot of good questions last night, and well done to everybody that did get involved. And hopefully the next one will be just as good, or hopefully that there won't need to be as many rigorous questions, because things have improved. But we'll move on from that now. We've got a few games to discuss, so we'll start off with the Blackburn game. A 2-1 win, Tom. The first home win for Luke Williams, the first one in the league since just before, New Year's Day it was actually, wasn't it, against West Brom? So a much needed one. I mean, there's been a bit of a theme recently with Swansea games, hasn't there, where the first half has been good and the second half hasn't lived up to the first. So that was another good example of it, really, wasn't it? But the first half was particularly impressive against Blackburn.
Yeah, I thought Swansea were excellent in the first half. There was so much intensity in the midfield, played on the front foot, defensively looked pretty good. I don't really know what the second half drop off that we've seen in games. I think we saw it a little bit with the Bristol City game as well, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But I don't really know where that's coming from. I think there's maybe a couple of reasons for it. Perhaps it's the style of football. The squad perhaps hasn't reached the conditioning levels that Luke Williams needs them to be at to play that type of football. But I think also you look at some of the options that are coming off the bench in some of these games, and I think it's I don't want to name any names, but I think perhaps it's not too much of a surprise that sometimes the intensity levels have dropped off, and I think that's really. I think Luke Williams said it himself on Monday. There needs to be more depth in the squad. He wants more, strength in attacking areas. I still think defensively, there's a few concerns for me. They're still conceding too many goals for my liking. Although the flip side of that is, I think Ben Cabango is now starting to find a bit more form after a pretty patchy run in recent weeks. But for me, the most important thing from that Blackburn game was the result, because the longer this run goes, or the longer that run would have gone on without winning at home, I think the more difficult it would have been to address. And certainly, I mean, with results going against Swansea elsewhere, the 3 points were all the more precious. I mean, I guess some people listening to this might think we've been a bit blasé about Swansea and a possible relegation battle, and certainly had they lost that game, perhaps we might be getting a little bit more worried. But there were lots and lots of positives and lots and lots of indications of what a Luke Williams team would look like. But the frustration for me is that there's just the same issues cropping up time and time again, really.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, like you say, the second half drop off is a concern. I do think some of it is to do with the substitutions. I think Joe Allen's been a big improvement in recent weeks. I think for me, he should have been in the team a few weeks before he was, but now he's in there. He's making a big difference. Obviously, I got a goal in this game, and the other goal scorer was Jamie Patterson. I think it wasn't long after Joe went off that we had a couple of. That's where we conceded, and obviously it was a bit of a shaky end. I mean, for me, we should really have won that game quite comfortably. But as you've said, Tom, it was vital really that we did end up winning that game. So, I mean, it was a bizarre weekend, that one, because from what I remember, I think 6 of the bottom 8 ended up winning. So we were still only 4 points clear of the drop. I mean, it's an unheard of thing really in the Championship for that to happen. But we then went to Watford, and got a well-earned point. Sort of a similar thing, better first half than second. I mean, we saw one of the most bizarre own goals we've ever seen, I think, in that game, didn't we, to say the least. I've seen a few bad ones by Swansea down the years. It actually reminded me of one the year that we went up to the Premier League in 2011. You may not have seen it, but Ashley Williams passes the ball back to Doris de Vries, and de Vries has moved out of the goal, so he then has to scramble back, slides to stop it, and unfortunately fails, and it goes in. It did actually cost us that day. We ended up losing, but Watford were gifted us the goal on this occasion, didn't they? It was a bit of a calamity, to say the least.
Yeah, and I think the frustration really from that is to not win the game, because I think for long periods Watford were pretty awful, really. And
Ronaldo will rue that chance, won't he?
Oh, absolutely, and I'm sure, I think as I was saying earlier, there's a lot of expectation being piled onto Ronaldo, but for me, he's kind of gone off the boil a little bit in the last couple of games.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think the worrying thing for me is when he's gone off the boil, Swansea don't have as much of a spark, really, particularly in those wide areas. And I think the Bristol City game as well, I guess. But I think to come away from those two games with only 1 point, given that both of those teams were really there for the taking, I think it must be hugely frustrating for Luke Williams and indeed supporters as well. But I guess in some ways it's kind of summed up Swansea City's season, really. But it's all about trying to build up the positives that we've seen over the last few weeks and hoping that it's going to be enough for the big one on Saturday, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute.
Yeah, we certainly will. Before that, we will talk about Bristol City. I mean, I was at the game on Sunday. That first half, I'm finding it quite difficult to put into words how much of a boring game it was. I mean, it felt to me a little bit like an end-of-season game where neither side's got much to play for. I mean, I couldn't believe how bad Bristol City were, was my overriding thing. I mean, earlier in the season, they came to us. We were 1-0 up at half-time, massively against the run of play. They did end up winning 2-1 in the end, and I felt we were lucky to only lose by the one goal because they played really well. And I mean, the strange thing is in that time, they changed the manager, which I really didn't see coming at that moment in time. And I couldn't believe how different they were. I mean, they stood off us. They did nothing. They didn't have a shot for an hour in the game. And the only thing that really stands out from that first half is quite possibly the worst corner I've ever seen in my life. So I don't really know what to say. It was so boring, and it took a while to get going. And if I'm honest, I don't think it ever really did it?
Well, I remember thinking at half time, gosh, I initially thought, how is Swansea not winning this? They've dominated this game. How have they not? At least grabbed a goal or something to show for it. And then I racked my brains. I was like, how many actual good chances have they really actually had?
It was all the ball, but doing nothing with it, was it?
But it was a really bizarre kind of game to try and take in and analyse, because Swansea looked comfortable, but just couldn't. There just wasn't really anything kind of tangible to talk about in the final third, which was really quite odd. And again, I fully agree with you. The Bristol City were really, really poor, and that corner. I mean, I think people. It even made the national press. I think that I saw the Daily Mail did a quick piece on it. So it's clearly, and I kind of understand it's definitely one for the bloopers reel. But I mean, God, again, just sums up that afternoon. Just like such sort of self-inflicted kind of, a self-inflicted wound that you just don't need to. I don't even know what was he even trying to do. I guess he was trying to play it short, but I couldn't wrap my head around the technique or anything. It was just, it's difficult to put it into words. I mean,
you could only laugh, can't you?
I watched it time and time again, and I just couldn't. But then the weird thing was, and perhaps I just imagined this, but I swear he went over to Luke Williams and got a high five or something. And I was like, what's going on there?
Match fixing.
Well, well, you said that, not me.
No,
if there's any legal bodies,
it clearly isn't. But I suppose maybe he's just trying to give him confidence or something. But my God, it's just one of those things. It does happen, doesn't it? I mean, you must have seen the Renato Sanchez pass at Chelsea, have you?
Well, of course, yeah. But I mean, it's. Oh God! I mean, that just summed it up. Really, it summed up the game. Really, and then to lose. To go on and lose that game, from a set piece as well. I mean, Swansea just look so nervous defending set pieces at the moment. I don't know how many they've actually conceded, but it feels like it's been quite a few over the last few years. And that's that which, when you consider the height and the physicality in that back line, to me is completely unforgivable. So the manner of losing it. I just come back to Ronaldo's corner. It just summed up the afternoon really, and it's kind of put a pin in the excitement a little bit for if there was any excitement for the South Wales derby coming up, because I think suddenly now, although I don't think anyone's actually turned or anything on Luke Williams, suddenly now there is a little bit more anxiety heading into that game, and there's anxiety in a South Wales derby at the best of times, isn't there? But suddenly the weaknesses in this squad are being scrutinised, and all the more heavy.
Yeah, I think that's what the issue is, really, isn't it? It's that, I mean, I would have taken a point before the game happily, but I mean, when I saw how bad Bristol City had been at half time, I was thinking, like, we've got to be thinking about winning this. I mean, they've offered nothing, and then to lose it is just blows my mind, really, because it's one of our worst results of the season. I think I have to look at it like that. But as you said, I mean, there weren't enough good chances, but there's one that obviously we will regret, and that's Plaqueta. He has to hit the target. I mean, I was right behind it. He's just completely sliced it. But you've got to hit the target from there. He had so much time and space. He's not far from the goal. I cannot believe that he didn't hit the target. I mean, I would say not to score is bad enough. To not hit the target is just ridiculous. But other than that, there weren't many good chances, really. We didn't have a single shot on target all day, and that's not good enough, is it? And I'd say in any game, really, that's not good enough. I mean, in theory, I could have played in goals for Bristol City, and I would have kept a clean sheet. And and if you've ever seen me in goals, the idea of that is absurd. So, yeah, not great. And I mean, as you say, it does put a bit of a dampener on the Saturday, and you've rightly picked out there. We're conceding a lot of goals from set pieces, and that, I think, is a bit of a concern given who we're playing next. I mean, Cardiff, a very strong record from set pieces. Obviously, their winning goal the other day was from a corner. That is a concern, I think. I mean, I can see them targeting that, but I mean, before we get into details on it too much, I mean, we haven't really asked you too much about South Wales derbies. I don't think we did anyway on the previous one. I mean, you must have covered a few. I mean, what are they like to you? Because I mean, you're a neutral, really, aren't you? You're not for either side or anything like that. I mean, do you enjoy these games?
Yeah, I am a neutral, despite what people on Twitter might say. But no, I love these games. They're the games that you want to cover when you're in this line of work. I mean, they've not always been the best games to watch from a purely footballing perspective. There's been some sort of nervy, edgy, kind of pretty dismal games, if I'm honest, over the years. But the atmosphere is always red hot. It's two passionate football clubs kind of colliding, and I think. So, I mean, as someone who isn't from South Wales, I think I can say with some certainty that I think a lot of people outside this area hugely underestimate the intensity of this derby, and I think it does very often get overlooked in terms of its importance to the two teams. But no, they're fantastic to cover. There's been some fantastic moments. I mean, from the Swans' point of view, the one that immediately sticks out is Ben Cabango's winner in the deep into stoppage time. I mean, the limbs in that away end were just absolutely unreal. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that ever again. But I think Luke Williams it was nice actually to hear Luke Williams talk about it on Monday night, because he was saying, I've stood on the sideline at Wembley, and the only thing that really compares to it is when Jamie Patterson rattled that one in against Cardiff. That to me shows you the level of kind of ferocity and passion that's there with this fixture. And I imagine if you've got any real skin in the game, it's both the best and the worst fixture in the world. But as a neutral, I mean, it really is a very, very special fixture.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that about Williams, wasn't it? I was quite surprised by that quote last night. I mean, the amount of effort you put into a season to go up, and then I think it was quite a late goal, wasn't it, to take it to extra time for Notts County in the playoff final. For him to actually say that the emotion was bigger in the derby, I mean, I was quite surprised by that. I mean, it does say a lot about this fixture and what it brings out. I mean, obviously I've been a Swansea fan for 30 years. People have been listening to me on here probably for about 10. But look, they're intense games, as everyone knows. And as you said, they are the best and the worst games in the world. I mean, I still maintain that when that Cabango goal went in last season, I don't think I've ever felt a jubilation like that in my whole life. And I'm talking playoff finals, Valencia, all these type of things. Even Kanu at the Euros, that would be in there as well. But I mean, that initial moment of last kick is just, well, there's no feeling quite like it. But I also remember, and no one will thank me for it, 2010 when it was the other way around and Michael Chopra got the winner, and that was a proper sickening feeling. So, we've been on both sides of the coin. I mean, from a Swansea point of view, we've been quite fortunate. There's been far more wins than losses in my lifetime. That recent loss was the first one I'd seen live anyway for 10 years. So I can only imagine how much Cardiff fans have had to suffer. Naturally, I have zero sympathy on that score. But, yeah, I mean, the one earlier in the season, though, Tom, was awful from a Swansea point of view. I mean, I actually think that's the worst I've ever seen us play in a derby. We didn't have a single shot until about the hour mark. We didn't have a shot on target till injury time. I still haven't seen it, because when Ramsey stuck the penalty in, I decided I'd had enough and I was going to go and sit on the bus, because I was not going to allow Cardiff fans to gloat and wind me up even more than I was already wound up. So, from my point of view, we've got a bit of a score to settle here. I'm not saying that obviously we really want to win this game, but we've got to be far better than we were in that game, and we've got to make sure that Cardiff don't do the double. But that game was really poor, wasn't it? And not like Swansea in a derby at all.
Yeah, I mean, when I've covered this fixture in the past, Swansea have been a dominant force in this fixture in recent years. And when I've written about it in the past, it's the point I've kind of always noticed is I sort of got the feeling that Cardiff never quite understood or the current crop at the time didn't quite understand the importance of the fixture. And what I mean by that is, I mean, I know some people in Cardiff like to sort of make out that this game kind of means more to Swansea, and that's kind of why, Swansea are always fired up for it. You talk to a Cardiff fan, and you'll find out very quickly that's nonsense. They really, really want to beat Swansea City. Like, it means.
They probably say it because we've kept winning.
Yeah, well, maybe they do, but I mean, this idea that they somehow care less about it. I'm sorry, I'm not having it. I think it's absolute nonsense. But I think in recent years, the players themselves, I think, have struggled to really understand the importance of it and what it means to the fans. Russell Martin, whatever you may think of his time, he completely understood what this fixture was about. He completely understood the importance and what it meant to the fans, and was pretty unapologetic in stressing the how monumental it was in terms of emotion and importance. And then, I'm afraid I'm going to have to talk about Michael Duff.
It's fine. I can live with it. He's not here anymore.
I mean, I mentioned earlier about how outsiders can underestimate it, and boy, did he underestimate it. I mean, I can still see him coming off, walking over to the away end at Cardiff City Stadium now after that game, which you're right was absolute. I mean, that's the worst I've seen Swansea in a derby probably since I started working here. And he just looked like a rabbit in headlights. I mean, he just looked like a man completely out of his depth. I don't think he really. I think it started then to dawn upon him, how big all of this was, and obviously, he got a bit of a pasting from the away end, as you might expect. But I think the way Duff talked about the derby, followed up by that performance. I mean, I know they went on a good run after that, but I think in hindsight, that still kind of felt like the first warning sign that this wasn't going to work out for him. And we've seen it with Cardiff as well. I mean, many defeats have seen off Cardiff managers. Neil Warnock, Steve Morrison, Neil Harris. They've all kind of gone shortly after derby defeats. I mean, it's so. It can see off managers, and I don't think that will happen with Luke Williams if Swansea do happen to lose on Saturday. I think what they've got in Luke though is someone who does appreciate the importance of it. In fact, the very first conversation I had with him, one of the memories he says that stuck out was. Standing on the sidelines, I forget which goal it was now. I don't think it was the Jamie Patterson goal, but it was during one of the derbies, and he turns around into the stand and he fixes his eyes on one supporter behind the dugout, and they just go crazy together. And he was saying, that was kind of one of the moments that made me realise how special this club is and everything like that. And I guess a cynic might say, he's just trying to say the right things, but saying the right things goes a long way. And if he means them to, and if he can get the team up for it, then I don't think we'll see a repeat of last time. I think Swansea City are a much better team than last time, despite all the weaknesses that I've mentioned earlier. Whether they've got enough to claim that win, I'm not so sure. I think it's kind of worryingly from a Swansea perspective, Cardiff looking in pretty decent nick in terms of form at the moment. I guess form goes out the window at a derby, as everyone says. But I don't have any concerns with how Luke Williams is going to prepare for this one. And if he can resurrect the ghost of Russell Martin, who knows? Perhaps we'll see something special. But we'll wait and see. It won't be boring, put it that way.
No, I mean, in my lifetime, there's only been 1-0, I think, in this fixture. I think the other one was in the very late 80s when I was a toddler. So there do tend to be goals in this fixture. I mean, it's interesting that you were talking there about Michael Duff, and I think, like I said, that was definitely a big part of his downfall. I actually remember I spoke earlier about the previous game with Bristol City, and where we were outplayed, and then after the game he mentioned he'd rather win promotion than lose to Cardiff twice. And I think obviously that's never going to go down great. But I think the big thing with it was that I'm thinking to myself, Michael, we are winless after about 6 games. You're talking down the derby and you're talking up promotion. I'm thinking promotion couldn't be further off the table. And I would say that your job could potentially be on the line if you carry on. And you're not talking up the net. You should be thinking to yourself, if I win the next game against Cardiff, and if you talk it up, then that will relieve pressure on you. But he couldn't seem to grasp that in the slightest. Very strange. But as you say, I think Luke Williams is far more someone that does understand what this fixture means, and it can be a catalyst for the rest of the season for either club, really. I mean, where do you see the big battlegrounds? I mean, as you say, Cardiff have done very well recently. We have to admit, 4 wins on the bounce. They're on a bit of a roll. They'll have confidence coming down here. It's not a great time for for us to play them potentially, I would say. But what's the concern? I mean, I mentioned earlier, didn't I, set pieces? I mean, that stands out as one straight away, really, for me.
Yeah, set pieces is definitely a very real concern. Having said that, I don't think being up for the sort of physical battle will necessarily be a problem. I think without Aaron Ramsey in that Cardiff midfield, I think Cardiff would fancy their chances in the middle of the park. Swansea would fancy their chances in the middle of the park. I think that's going to be a very, very important battle to be won in this fixture. Neither side really. I mean, but both sides have kind of got the same problem that they don't really have a natural goal scorer. Cardiff have kind of struggled to find a really sort of a striker that they can really kind of throw their back in behind, and Swansea have still got a massive Joel Perreault shaped hole up front. So it's going to come down to really, I think, who's going to be the more creative in midfield, because I think whoever can create the more chances is probably going to have. It sounds simple, but it's true. Whoever creates the more chances is going to have a better chance of winning this game. So there's a lot of very close battles all over the pitch, I think, for me. I think it's going to be a battle of attrition at times, I think. But if Swansea can find their rhythm in terms of possession, certainly during the Russell Martin days, I mean, they passed them to death, didn't they? And Cardiff, I think, still struggle when playing teams like that a little bit. And I think, I mean, we spoke about the form, guys, but I mean, you look at some of the games that they've won, and Cardiff fans won't thank me for saying it, but they've had a bit of luck in some of those games. So, yeah, I mean, I just keep coming back to the set piece problem. Really, that is the main alarm bell that keeps ringing, and I think you would hope that it's one that Luke Williams is going to address this week. But I mean, I spoke about how the likes of Ronaldo have gone off the ball in the last couple of games. Boy, this would be a great game for him to find some form, wouldn't it? I mean, if he wanted to, I mean, he's already a pretty popular figure, isn't he? And if he can find that little bit of magic and write himself into Derby Day folklore, then I mean, he'll never have to buy a pint at Swansea ever again. So there's players like him are really going to have to step up, I think, and I hesitate to put a prediction on this. I'm sure you're probably going to ask me for a prediction at the end, and
I think you're going to sit on the fence if I ask you.
It's very difficult to get off the fence because I just think there's very little separating the two teams in terms of their
I'm not actually on the same page as you. I'm thinking it could well be a draw, but I mean, I think from a Swansea point of view, Ronaldo, I think, could be a big threat. Hopefully, I mean, what I'm hoping for is that obviously no midweek game. Potentially, he's been a little bit tired over the last couple of weeks. I mean, maybe not used to playing 3 games in a week, and we all know how rigorous this division is. So I think the team more or less does pick itself. I think there might be 1 or 2 instances where there could be a change. I think Josh Key might have a chance of starting instead of Kyle Norton, but I don't think he will. But I think the main thing up for debate really is who's going to play up front. Liam Cullen did the other day. It's quite ineffective. Jamal Lowe came on. I don't think he's going to start personally because maybe not had enough minutes. If he does start, he'll only play an hour. And the other option really is Jerry Yates, who has done nothing recently either. So I think it's a problem position. But I think Cullen will play. And I think that's probably the best option. I mean, do you think the same thing?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see the likes of Norton or Jamal Lowe getting some kind of significant role on the day, whether that's off the bench or from the off. I mean, well, Norton's not going to come off the bench, is he? I mean, he'll either start or he won't play. But these are players who know know the importance of this fixture. I know it's a cliche, but that kind of stuff does matter in a derby. And I think, I mean, coming back to who starts up front, I think Liam Cullen probably is the most likely at the moment. It's difficult, not because anyone's kind of played particularly well, but because no one's really seized their chance up front yet. And I know that's kind of, in some ways, it's a little bit harsh because I mean some of the players who are in contention there are not really out and out number 9s anyway. I mean, you mentioned Jerry Yates. I feel a bit sorry for Jerry Yates, to be honest, because I don't think he's as bad a player as people are making out. But he's not an out and out striker. He's not a natural finisher. He's always been a secondary striker. Really, that's kind of his best position. He needs someone to play off. He can't lead the line on his own because he hasn't got that predatory instinct. So, to me, I think you look at Cullen's got perhaps that little bit more pace. He can hold, that ability to play all across the front three as well. He can hold up the ball a little bit better, perhaps, than some of the others. And again, if you really want to throw in the old cliche of how much he understands this fixture, being a local boy, that's going to count for something as well. He's not going to need any motivation, is he? I wouldn't be. I think I'm with you on this. I wouldn't be surprised to see Cullen start up front. But there certainly is some debate there, I guess. I mean, certainly Jerry Yates is still very much part of the conversation for Luke Williams, but he's still not pulled up trees as a number 9.
No, I think he's missed too many chances. That's been my concern with him, really. Whereas I look at Cullen. I think Cullen, to be honest, is someone who also needs someone to play alongside. I think he was pretty decent last year towards the end when we were playing 2 up front. But I think the main reason why I would play Cullen is I just think if you get a chance, I think he is the most likely to take it. So for that reason, he has to play. So, but I think Cullen up front on his own, it doesn't really suit him either. But it's a big problem. I think in the summer, obviously, someone's going to, that is going to be a big priority to try and get a striker in. Right, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you for a prediction. We've already half discussed it anyway. I don't like doing predictions for derbies, if I'm honest with you, so you're safe. But I mean, we did touch a little bit earlier on the relegation battle. I mean, you agreed with, well, you said it first, I think, about, that you don't really view Swansea as being in trouble. But I mean, the interesting thing is there's a lot of teams that are certainly not safe, isn't it? It's very close at the bottom. I mean, so do you think it could be a higher points total maybe than normal this year? Or do you think it will be, what will happen is you'll get to about, 4 games to go and there won't be anywhere near as many teams in it. And then you'll just start to see, there'll be 3 obviously will drop and then there'll be maybe a couple in it on the final day and stuff like that. Or do you think it could be quite open and very unpredictable?
I just think, teams who are in, I would say probably, I think Swansea and Millwall, I mean, they're both on 43 points at the moment. And I just get the feeling that a couple of wins could see them start to pull away a bit. That's just my gut feeling at the moment. I know Sheffield Wednesday have obviously improved pretty significantly in recent weeks. Huddersfield Town, I mean, they've had a blip recently, but again, they've started picking up points. There's teams definitely below them that are annoyingly still picking up points. But you look at the run-in that Swansea City have got, they've still got to play quite a few of those teams. And I just don't see Swansea picking up, not picking up at least a couple of wins there, which I think will probably be enough to see them pull away. I mean, you talked about how a derby win can relaunch a season. And I think you completely bang on there because the momentum and the euphoria of winning a game like that can definitely carry you through the next few weeks. But it's been a tough January and February for Swansea. They played most of the top 6. But you would think looking at the run in and the run of games that's come, you would think there's quite a few winnable ones there. And I said for a long time, I just think there's at least 4 or 5 teams worse than Swansea in this division, and that's kind of I know the points gap probably doesn't suggest that at the moment. Well, it probably doesn't suggest I should be so confident, I should say, on that at the moment. But I still sort of stand by that. And I think we'll probably see that towards the end of the season. In terms of the overall relegation battle, I would not be surprised if it does go down to the last day. Some of the teams in there, I mean, you've got Plymouth, Blackburn, Stoke, all on 41 points. QPR, Birmingham City, 39, Huddersfield Town and Sheffield Wednesday all on 38. And then obviously Rotherham, who are gone. So, I mean, flipping heck, it is tight. I can't remember it being this tight down at the bottom in the Championship for some time. And I don't know. I mean, I've got the table right in front of me now. And it's like...
It's crazy, isn't it?
Now I'm looking at it, I'm sort of wondering if maybe I am being a bit too blasé about Swansea.
I think my concern really is that, well, I wouldn't say it's a concern at this stage, but this is how I would worry, is if Saturday goes badly, obviously then we're on a downer and it's been a miserable season. Easter then becomes very big because Sheffield Wednesday away, QPR at home. Now, if we only got 1 point from those two, we'd have to say we're in a bit of trouble. I think that's the concern, but I do believe that I have the faith that we'll do okay at least, and we'll just keep our heads above water. And like you say, I mean, the fixture list should play into Swansea's hands because, they have played everybody at the top. And I think Blackburn are one, for example, got to play all the top 4. I mean, you don't want that. And John Eustace hasn't had a win yet, for example. So when you put it like that, you'd have to say Blackburn finishing above Swansea, for example, is something that shouldn't happen. So that's why I think I'm on the same page as you.
I mean, the thing is, though, I mean, it's what makes dropping points at Bristol City and Watford all the more frustrating, because I think, just getting one more win out of that, turning one of those results into a win, and I think the picture looks very, very different. And, you can maybe just focus on the derby being just a derby rather than a potentially important source of points, which, let's be honest, it is. I mean, putting the emotions of the game aside, Swansea still need the points. They still need to put points on the board. Without going all Michael Duff on it, that remains the most important thing for them at the moment. So, yeah, it just heightens that. It just heightens that frustration about recent weeks. And Luke's got to find a way of turning that round. He's got to find a way of making things click, and more importantly, well, actually not so much making things click, because I think Swansea have clicked quite well. The problem is they just can't do it for long enough. They just keep coming out in the second half and looking a completely different team, and it's happened it's happening too often for it to be a coincidence now. So there's clearly some kind of fundamental issue there that needs to be addressed. And like I said, whether that's to do with conditioning, whether that's to do with the strength and depth of the squad, I don't know. I mean, certainly the likes of Joe Allen, you're not going to get 90 minutes out of him anymore. I mean, he's going to give you a really, really good shift for the time he is on there. But, you bring on someone like a Jay Fulton, for example. Does that give you the same level of bite in midfield? I think a lot of people would perhaps argue no. And I don't want to be unfair on Jay Fulton, because I think he's been a terrific servant for Swansea City. But is that the sort of player that's going to give you the energy to maintain the sort of football that Luke wants to play for a full 90 minutes? I mean, you're not. This is notwithstanding the fact that it's very difficult to play that kind of football for 90 minutes. We saw it under Russ as well. I mean, you can't play these. To use another Michael Duffism, almost extreme brands of football, and keep up the same level of intensity for 90 minutes is very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult, and particularly difficult when you've got a squad where the strength and depth, as we've already discussed, isn't quite there yet. So, these are all the things that Lou's going to have to think really hard about. But, I always wonder how the preparation is for a derby. I mean, do you ever think about the wider picture, or is it, you just got to focus on, this is the one game, this is the only thing that matters, everything else can wait? And I'm always fascinated by that as like a player or a manager or whatever. Does that approach ever happen? So yeah, I'm quite looking forward to Saturday. I think Swansea are going to give a far better impression than they did last time at the Cardiff City Stadium. But yeah, I just hope that the same problems that we've seen over the last few weeks don't come back to haunt them, because Cardiff do have players that can take advantage of those weaknesses.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And, as we've said, that Swans have certainly been a first half team recently, and there would be no better time to put in a 90-minute performance. So, lads, if you're listening to this, no pressure, but yes, we would absolutely love that. We'll wrap this up now. Tom, thanks again for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. So I suppose I should do a rallying call now. Obviously, we all know what it means, this fixture, to all of us. It's not been a great season. There hasn't been a lot of highlights to look back on, but this can really put some gloss on it. As we know, there is no feeling like winning on Derby Day. For everyone that's going, make sure you get behind the boys, sing your hearts out for the 90 minutes. Anyone from the club listening, which they probably are, make sure you get that pre-match playlist on the go. Daydream Believer just before kick-off to get us going. I think there's still tickets left, not many. If you're listening and you haven't got one yet, don't hang about. Make sure you get one. Be there. It's the only place to be. 12:30 on Saturday at the Swansea.com Stadium. The South Wales Derby. Let's do it. We've got a score to settle after what happened in September. So let's get it done. Who are we? Jack Army. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.